Okay, looks like everyone is here. Joyce, are we ready?
You are ready, sir.
All right. I would like to go ahead and call the Monona Grove School District Board of Education Special School Board meeting to order. Has there been a declaration of public notice?
Yes, there has.
All right, thank you. Now we'll go to consideration of including possible action regarding the following item: participation in high school winter athletic competitions. Dan, I'll let you go ahead and start it off.
Sure. Okay, so thank you, Andrew. So we have three pieces that we would like to present tonight, and many of these, much of this information the board has heard and discussed previously. So some of this is just summary to remind us of what we're working with tonight and the intent of the meeting. And so if it's okay, I'd like to start with the memo that I wrote to the board that just provides some background and, again, kind of a summary of what leads us here tonight. So very short. I won't take much time on it, but I just want to make sure we're grounded and all kind of on the same page. So if it's okay, I'd like to share my screen and go through that briefly.
Sounds good.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, and hopefully I grabbed the right screen here. All right, so again, the background is just kind of a timeline of events. And I guess to summarize, if you recall back to last summer, we started with the initial governor's order that closed all school districts in the state last spring, and that took us through July 1st. And so from that point on is where our local health agency, Dane County, and our public health of Dane County and Madison, started issuing guidance, orders, recommendations, and so on. So specifically tonight, our topic of high school athletics and high school sports, some of the key orders and guidance that came out. The very first guidance, actually the very first order from public health that addressed sports competitions was back on June 15th. And in that initial order, that had the requirement basically for physical distancing. And in order to accommodate mandatory physical distancing, the only sports that were allowed were ones that they identified as low risk. In other words, ones that could be held while maintaining the physical distancing of 6 feet. So that was the original order back in June 15th. July 1st, their next order, or the order 7, added to that and incorporated the mass gatherings requirement. And so that had the limit, of course, as of 10 individuals indoors, 25 outdoors, and they added this mass gathering requirement as a condition as well of any kind of sports activities or competitions. Okay. So since July 1st, that's essentially the rules that we've been operating under. In Dane County. They've had a number of additional orders that have come out of recommendations, but specifically to sports, those have not changed since July 1st, with one exception. When we scroll down to, when we get to November 17th, you may recall emergency order number 10 prohibited all mass gatherings in Dane County completely for indoor sports of any type, or excuse me, of any activities of any size. So that was a temporary order that lasted from November 17th until December 16th. Said no mass gatherings at all. When that expired on December 15th, emergency order number 11 was issued. That's what we're under right now. And that essentially takes us back to the same place we were back since July. That there is, within Dane County, no sports competitions unless physical distancing can be maintained at all times. And this is, again, I want to point out a different requirement than what we have in the schools. In the schools, the requirement is physical distancing to the greatest extent possible. And we're going to talk a little bit later about what the difference is. Where with the sports requirement, it is physical distancing at all times, with no exceptions. And so that's the order we're under. Also on the timeline, just noted again, a number of different board meetings where this was discussed and presentations and so on. But just to kind of set the background of what does public health say about sports competitions. Okay, so then in addition to the orders, as you're aware, we've had at least weekly calls with representatives from public health throughout this entire pandemic. And as we were approaching the winter sports season, there was quite a bit of dialogue again about the sports competitions to make sure that everyone really, understood the order, where there have been leeway, how does this apply to certain situations. So we had those conversations at a number of meetings. And then in addition, when they have their weekly call-ins, they do have an opportunity for school district representatives to, ask questions where they'll give a written response to make sure that we're clear exactly what is the position of public health. And so that occurred on October 22nd, where there was a pretty, a large focus of that meeting was specifically about athletics. And so I copied and pasted specifically from the call notes from that meeting. Again, board members, you've seen this before. The one piece I think that is most relevant to our discussion tonight is question 2 and response C, where the question was to be very clear about how does the order impact any activities outside of Dane County? And so that question was, and not to I guess to be very specific what the question was, the question read, competitions between both schools and clubs are not allowed in phase 2 of the PHMDC plan. Is this restricted to only competitions held in Dane County or for all Dane County schools and organizations? And in part C, again, without reading the entire paragraph, the second or the third sentence, basically it's saying that, of course, they don't have authority outside of Dane County, but we do not recommend that Dane County residents leave the county to play sports that are not allowed in Dane County, as these are higher risk activities for disease transmission and could increase the number of cases in Dane County. So this written response is not part of the order. I want to make it clear this is a recommendation, okay, from public health. And there is a distinction, of course, between orders and recommendations that we'll talk about in a little bit as well. Okay, so I think those are the key pieces. When we get to the end of the discussion, I did put a couple considerations for the board as far as possible, motions or action that you may choose to take tonight. If you choose to take no action, that means we continue to follow all public health requirements and recommendations, which would prohibit competitions. If the board would choose to take action to allow competition, I have a recommended motion that you may choose to make that would allow that. And so again, we can get to that at the end of the discussion. The other piece that was requested from some board members was what is happening in other public schools in Dane County. And this is pretty fluid. This has changed significantly in the last week and a half as far as decisions that local school boards are making. And so at this point, as of today, there are, and I focused on, again, the schools that actually have the high schools that reside in Dane County. Cambridge, part of the district in Dane County, but their high school is not, so they are not subject to the order. So you've seen that on some lists. But there are 8 school districts that their boards have authorized competitions outside of Dane County, and there are 7 that have not acted at this point. And I am aware that some of those are under consideration, but don't have any knowledge about how they may or may not act. So let me just stop there. Again, most of this information, board members, you've seen before, but I just wanted to take a few minutes and just kind of summarize where we stand as far as public health. So are there any questions that I can answer with regard to that memo?
Let me look around. Okay, I don't see any questions, so we'll go ahead and proceed.
Okay, thank you. So what we'd like to do, I think there's 2 important considerations for the board this evening. One is how does any action or inaction specifically impact our programming, our students at the high school? And then secondly, of course, is the issue of the order and potential liability. And so what we'd like to do next is turn to Jeff Schreiner, our activities director. He's going to give a short presentation about the status of of currently of our winter athletics, as well to talk about what would happen if the board were to approve competitions and how would we proceed forward and so on. And so, again, some of this information has been shared, but I think he put together a summary document. And then if you wouldn't mind holding your questions till the end, it's a fairly short presentation. And then at the end, you have an opportunity to ask questions. We also have with us a number of our head coaches this evening. We can introduce those individuals as well when we get to that point, as well, of course, our high school principal, Mitch McGrath. So with that, if it's okay, I'll share my screen again for the slides. And Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Dan, and thanks everyone for being here tonight. Just having our board on in a special meeting, having some of our coaches attend and others of importance, it just kind of demonstrates the support that we do have for extracurricular programs at Monona Grove, and that's respected. It is nice to know that we are still considering this and having these meetings to pursue a better understanding for our students. The screen that Dan has shown with you is just going to walk you through some of the information that you've probably had in front of you, but it's also to put it there again and then also allow questions that you may have of me. This has been pretty fluid. I look back to last March, 10 and a half months ago, when we went away from everything, not only school, but also our extracurriculars. That's been a long time for everybody. It's been a long time away from passion from our coaches. I respect the coaches that are going to be speaking tonight because they will share with you right from their lap in terms of what they're dealing with and their feelings, and that needs to be respected as well. But 10 months is a long time for everybody, and so as we look through some of this material, I want to provide some time for you to ask some questions. But go ahead, Dan, if you roll to slide 2. This is just an information overview where when we started the winter sports seasons, our state association took a look at the winter season, and it's not the normal winter season. What they had to do with that is they had to shrink it down in order to fit the fall season, where some schools decided not to do a fall season and put it into the spring. The winter season got compressed by a couple of weeks, so that is a shorter time frame start to finish than it typically is. The link there is just to the Board of Control, their summaries that they continue to go through and to adjust and modify and accommodate their rules of operation in and around this COVID time. Next slide. So here's where we're at currently. Athletics and activities have been virtual only at this time. We've been in conversation through Zoom meetings with our coaches about what they can do virtually, how they can connect in, and we've been virtual. The high school activities and clubs, I've met with them before we went on our winter break. We are looking to reconnect as we come back on January 4th, and we'll be starting to explore and open up opportunities for them to regain their opportunities in small groups according to guidelines. High school athletics are following Dane County Order number 11 at this time, which brings us to the 3 bullets below, that all sports are allowed indoors for up to 10 people with social distancing and 25 people outdoors. Games and competition are allowed for low-risk sports. The low-risk sports at this time are swim and gymnastics. And in the sport of swim, that is just individual events and not relays. And then our game and competitions for high schools are not allowed between teams for medium and high-risk sports. However, they could compete if you were to modify that sport and stuff, but we're not looking at doing that. We're looking at options to have our sports in full swing, but that would have to be outside of Dane County. Next slide. So here's the winter sports impact that we have right now. You can see that we have 8 programs that are running. Other organizations, our dance team, they're working to try to do what they can. They've been kind of put into a virtual scene as well. Our strength and conditioning, not only are they trying to come on board with their winter sports, but they're also trying to connect and get ready our fall and spring sports that are right behind this winter sports season. But just a quick look at the impact that we have with our programs. Note that on our sports that we offer, we do have some rental facilities. Gymnastics is at Turner's Hall, and our wrestling program is over at Nichols, and our boys hockey is at Hartmeyer. Those facilities, other than Nichols, Hartmeyer, and Turner's, they may have their own orders of operation within their buildings, but as a school program coming in, we'll still have to adhere to the guidance of a school program within a rental facility. Next slide. Our winter sport coaches have been working as we roll through order number 9, order number 10, and now order number 11 to prepare for what our county guidelines were to give us. So here you can see our small group plans. Each of our coaches had a hand at crafting these plans. And then also the first bullet there is just our winter facilities schedule for our small groups. Through a registration, we found that we had 189 students that were interested in our winter sports. That's a large number when you try to break it down into groups of 10. We needed that number to identify how many groups we would have and how we were going to place them in our facilities. So there you can see, you can click on and see how we're scheduling that up in terms of accommodating all of our students that are interested in our winter sports. Most of the planning too here, they follow a general plan for COVID guidelines, and so they're similar, but then they become more sport related as it goes through each of our sports. Next slide. Just some resources for you. Emergency order number 11. You know, there's a link there to what's allowed versus order number 10, order number 11. Public health of Madison-Dane County. It kind of rolls us back to order number 9. I will actually be in with Dane County athletic directors tomorrow. We have a meeting with the public health officials that have been meeting with our group. It'll be an interesting conversation just because of in the last week, we've had some school districts kind of in different positions and stuff, and in other districts kind of doing what we're doing, revisiting some things. So that meeting has continued every other week for us to kind of stay connected and kind of in sync with not only the Dane County public health orders, but just also Dane County schools and what we've been doing. So when I get emails in terms of our planning, I would like to say that all of our Dane County schools have been planning collectively. You know, we have different timelines that we push information out and things like that. Those are locally driven and stuff, but I feel really comfortable that all of the Dane County athletic directors have collaborated together and we're willing to share working points and talking points and moving points through this whole time and stuff. So I feel pretty well connected to our planning that's been going on and the conversations we've been having with Dane County Public Health. And then there's just some WIAA considerations and guidelines to return to winter sports. Understand that those are WIAA guidelines. Each school district may also put in their own guidelines that they feel comfortable with and stuff, and Monona Grove would be doing the same thing too. We're not going to enter into anything that's not up to our standards of what we feel are quality control items, and we would have those expectations going forward if we are to compete with any other schools. Next slide. Safety protocols. The Monona Grove School District had a team led by Sean Bielmeyer in terms of coming up with a district plan. This is our plan not only for the high school athletics and activities, but it's a district concept. So we focused in on that to share that with our coaches and stuff. And bringing that plan together was a great exercise for us as well, just to wrap our feelings around our methods that we were going to put into this protocol. So that's there for you to see as well. We need to, going forward, we need to rely on our parents to be monitoring and screening their child or their children as we come back to small groups or as we come back to anything. And the reason that is because with the uncertainty with COVID, it's just one where we just need to be making sure that we're not stretching our elements in terms of knowing a student might be symptomatic or something, and then also coming into one of our school programs offered and stuff. So we will rely on our parents to monitor and communicate effectively with us on either end of what the communication is. The last point there, coaches will strongly encourage their team to kind of remain within their own bubble, do what's best for their teammates and family, and kind of stay within that during their sports seasons, just to try to stay connected with that team concept. Next slide. WIAA guidelines. I know that some of you reached out to me and were asking about these guidelines and stuff. So I put a link in there to those. The WIAA most recently updated those, I want to say was mid-December 14th. And again, those are specific mitigations coming out of their end for the whole state. It's a starting point for all of us. So most of those mitigations will make our page in terms of regulations, but like I said, we will also put in what we feel is our comfort control items as well. The next bullet there is safety protocols. Local control will determine if schools may travel across county lines for competitions. We did have a couple of schools in terms of Edgewood and Marshall that started off with that in the fall. The other Dayton County schools were in a place of where we are today in conversations with their school boards and their communities in terms of the respect for COVID and just the place in Dane County guidelines. But if we were to look to participate outside of Dane County, it would be our local decision on that. The culminating event, the state tournaments. The state tournaments will consist, when we started the winter season, there was, the WIAA listed this as a culminating event. As athletic directors, we learned through the fall season what this really meant. The WIAA was still shaping up what their definition of the culminating event was. They were able to put a state tournament format together and in place for the winter season before we got to the end of the season. So that culminating event will consist of a regional, sectional, and state tournament in place like a normal winter season. And that now has been finalized. Next slide. So our options at this time, and understand too that as we've been presenting information and stuff, it continues to be pretty fluid. I think where we're at right now is we are not considering canceling our winter sports seasons. We are going to put something forward for our students so we can start our return back to whatever we can provide. But the two options that we're looking at is the option number 2 there is limit winter sports to Dane County Public Health. What that would mean right now is that we would be falling under order number 11, and that's we would have small group practices of no more than 10 per group. The number of coaches that we put in front of those groups does not count into that number of 10. Our coaches will determine best placement and sorting out of those groups or arrangement of those groups. That is currently organized to start January 4th. Our coaches have their plans in place and their facilities in place, and they're ready to go with that coming up here next Monday. The third one now is where we are tonight, allowing our teams to play contests outside of Dane County. It can be done. And but as we sit here today, I'll tell you, it gets harder when you take the next couple of slides. Will show you our timelines and our seasons. The season's moving along here, and it does get harder to be involved with competitions and define them. So, you know, deciding where we're going to go with this is important to us because we want to be able to blend in and get some competitions for our student athletes and our coaches and our programs as well. So it can be done. We are looking at our varsity JV and JV2 levels, and we'll look to match up as best we can. Practices would follow current mandates and guidelines to be conducted with no more than 10 students in small groups in one setting at any time. We would look to play our schools outside of Dane County. And if we are playing another Dane County school, we would look to arrange a facility outside of Dane County for that contest. And also the school district would provide the transportation to all of these events, and we would try to make it as safe of a transportation route as possible for those involved in that event. Also note that if we're playing a school that is not in our county, we would be the visiting school. We would roll into their guidelines that they already have set in place. What would typically happen in that regard is that school would send me the guidelines. I would get those guidelines. I would review it with the coach. We would look for things of our comfort, and we would work that school to make sure that we comfortably would accept that event to be played. If we are with another Dane County school and we're looking to play outside of in a facility outside of Dane County, I would get with that other Dane County school and we'd put guidelines into place. Those guidelines, we have those. We're in a position where we've never had to play that card because we've not been allowed to host any events. But those guidelines for our school, they've got, like I said, they've been constructed by all of us as athletic directors, not only in Dane County, but also schools within the Badger Conference and stuff. We share resources, and all those resources respectfully will represent any school kind of within our area and also Dane County as well. So those guidelines are ready to go. I feel the strength of our coaching staff, the respect for COVID, and the support that we get from our district and stuff. I feel like if that was our option to do that, we would put our best foot forward to make that happen. Next slide. Badger Conference. This is just a link here too that the Badger Conference rolling into the winter season. was in a position where we had 9 schools that were going to be able to participate because they were outside of Dane County, and we had 6 schools that were within Dane County. So with that dynamic, we felt like we were not able to hold the image or the conference, the Badger Conference, together for the winter season. So therefore, the winter sports statement came out right in front of this season, which basically said that we will not have any conference champions. We will not have any conference awards for any individual student or schools throughout this season, just because it doesn't resemble a regular winter Badger Conference season. Badger Conference schools right now, you can see there the schools that are outside of Dane County. Those are the schools that started up right at the beginning of their season. Monroe High School came back on board starting on December 28th. Milton High School is starting up on January 4th. And then the Dane County Badger schools, Edgewood, DeForest, Wanakee, they all have models in place to be playing outside of Dane County. And then to be determined right now is Monona Grove, Mount Horeb, Oregon, and Stoughton. And understand too that those models to play outside of Dane County, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Those models have been shared with by other athletic directors and stuff. And so we're not going to look to reinvent a model to play outside of Dane County. We would look to the strengths and weaknesses of the models that are already in place, and we would look to put those in motion for us. Next slide. This slide here is just gives you a little snapshot because there was different information being asked me and stuff. So I try to put something together so you can see it in one slide. The WIAA tournament, you can see when the regional, sectional, and state tournaments start. If you take a look at where we are right now, we are sitting at the end of December. If you look down at boys swim and wrestling, their seasons will end with their tournament starting by the end of this month of January. So there is an importance in terms of what our direction is because if we have a chance to get back into play, we need to get going on this so we can get those guys or those sports some opportunities here before their tournaments start. And you can see also there too, it'll stretch into February and stuff, but again, we're moving pretty quickly with this winter season already. The number of games to be involved in tournament play, there's been some questions and some shared information going back and forth on this. The WIAA, typically there is a number of games that a sport has to play in order to be eligible for the tournament. The WIAA has stepped in and they've waived all of that regulations this year just due to COVID. So there is no number of games that you have to play in order to be tournament eligible. I put it on here just so you could kind of see, for instance, boys basketball, normally you'd have to have 6 games played before you'd be tournament eligible. So with that, as we look at that, we would be tournament eligible going into it. There was some conversations going back and forth. Yeah, but what if we don't play any games? The WIAA has a seeding format that they use to place teams by strength into the tournament. If we had played or participated in no games going into the tournament, we'd obviously take a low seed in that and we'd have to play from the bottom up. But understandably, it would be better than not being involved in the tournament at all. So we're willing to take that challenge on. Tournament size, it's important here because as we look at this, we take a look at the number of our students that are interested in participating in our winter season. That's awesome, but we still have some regulations as we enter into the tournament season. It's not that we want to leave anybody behind, but we are regulated to a certain number of student athletes that would be represented on our bench or within our program. Our coaches would be up to working that so no kid would feel left out. I'm not worried about that. Our coaches do a great job of including everybody and making the best of that, but we are regulated to those numbers there. And then the last column there is, will MG be involved? We are anticipating on January 4th that the WIAA will send all athletic directors an email that says, what are your plans for the winter tournament? With that, I will reply that we are interested in being involved in all tournament or all sports for the winter season, as we feel that that's our best interest right now is to get us into the tournament, and we can always regulate or move things with further decisions down the line as needed. Next slide. This next slide here too is just to give you an understanding too of where we're at with it. Typically, the WIAA had started the winter season back in November. At that time, we were looking at order number 9, and we had a plan in place where we were going to delay the start of our winter season to January 4th. The purpose of this delayed start was again, we have not done anything since last March. So we have our whole student body that's kind of been shelved since last March and stuff. And as we were looking at an opportunity to bring back small groups, we were looking at all student body, all sports, trying to get all of our students together to interact and just take that moment of, again, being in our facilities and enjoying their peers amongst themselves rather than sports specific. So when working with the winter coaches, we did agree to delay our start until January 4th to allow this reboot kind of comeback for all of our students. Order number 10 came in and shut that down for us, so we didn't even get an opportunity to put that forward. But we still hung on to our January 4th start date. We are now at January 4th start date, and we are sports specific with just winter sports. So you can see here where the start date is January 4th, but you can see the end date there for each of our sports seasons. Number of practices needed before play. This is important because there is an acclimatization feeling there where you just don't start kids back in and expect to play the next day. There are some outside groups, some clubs and stuff. Our kids roll with that at times and stuff, but an educational program, school program like that, the WIAA will mandate us to have a certain number of practices in. So when you look at a boys basketball, the first number there was 7. Although we will start on January 4th, they will need 7 practices in, and we'll be eligible for play on January 13th. As you look at gymnastics, they have 20 practices. They'd be eligible on the 1st. So you can take a look at that and see what we're under, and that's why it's important to get a start here and kind of get our groups going. Now, what determines a practice? It's a scheduled practice for us. It's not mandated that every kid involved with that program has to be at that practice for that to count. It just has to be a scheduled practice, and our coaches have got to be in front of the kids kind of in a practice setting. Next column over is games during a normal season. You take a look at what we're dealing with right now, and here's where our passion is at. You know, we've had some families obviously share some their passion with us through emails and stuff like that. We're going to have coaches talk tonight in terms of where they're at with things. We are looking at a very different season where typically we have a large number of events and we have plenty of time to build our kids up to that participation in those events. We are kind of compressed into a season here, but we are also looking at it saying it's better than nothing. And I think what's come out the month here has been the pride for the Monona Grove uniform. You know, to put our kids in that uniform and stuff, that is the difference maker for our kids. So, you know, from my seat, it's important that our kids get that opportunity to do that. Our uniforms have been ready since July in terms of handing them out to our programs and stuff like that. So that is a pride piece for Monona Grove to be just kind of seen on the high school sports scene in a Monona Grove uniform. But you can take a look through that column in terms of what a normal season is and what our coaches will be faced with trying to compress and get done before the tournament season. The last column there is coach's goal, if allowed to compete. In conversation with each of our coaches, I've asked them, you know, what do you feel would best meet your needs? And this is where we really need to have respect for our coaches, because what they feel and, you know, the pace that they feel that they can have quality time with the kids and grow them to development and where they need to be to get the success out of this season, we have to respect that. And we have to take what we can get and make the most of it. So that last column will kind of tell you what we're looking at. I have been in conversation with several schools. The WIAA will have a Games Wanted tab on their webpage that shows constantly games that we could possibly entertain as far as taking on. But I've also been in conversation with schools that are within our conference, but outside of Dane County, but also within kind of our striking points that we normally play. Those schools, they're anxious. They want to lock us in so we can get on that schedule and stuff. It's been tough to commit to that because we can't commit to anything right now because where we're held with our county guidelines. So as we look ahead, we coming out of tonight, if the decision is to play forward outside of Dane County, we'll be pressing on with these goals for our coaches to try to meet that and get our kids into that type of play format. Next slide. And this is, you know, so that's a quick snapshot. I know you guys have been getting a lot of information and stuff, and I didn't want to take a ton of time with that, but the last slide there, I just want to open it up for questions from you for me before we turn it over to our coaches to also answer any of your questions.
Lorraine?
Thank you for your presentation. I just had a quick clarifying question. So you indicated 189 students were interested in winter sports. Is that higher or lower than usual?
That is higher. And, 189 came in and we left our registration window open because we're not going to, if a kid was to tell us today that they're interested in now coming out, we're not going to tell them you missed the registration window. But we have been taking in some other numbers. So that number may be even more right now. It is larger because in the winter season, unfortunately, we do have some sports that will make cuts or make decisions to not everyone can be involved with that just because of the size of the teams and stuff. We went into this winter season, we peeled that off of there. We're not going to tell any kid you can't make this team. So as we look at this winter season, we want to meet students' needs. And our coaches know that if their numbers are larger, that's what they're going to be working with to try to make the best experience for that student in their pursuit of their passion or the sport that they choose. So our numbers are larger this year.
Okay, thank you.
Susan Manning?
I just wanted to specifically thank Jeff for inviting the coaches to be here tonight. It's extremely helpful to be able to hear from those on the front lines who are also, many of them also are teachers, about how they specifically feel about this, because we really haven't had this opportunity. And I want to thank specifically Lorene and I think it was Eric and Susan and the rest of the board for encouraging to have this meeting so we could have this discussion. And I really appreciate those that are here tonight and that they were invited to be here tonight. It was my understanding. So I was struggling a little bit because I knew I was going to have this pretty bad drive today because we didn't have anything posted on board docs. So one of my main questions to Jeff is the PowerPoint that you just showed to us available to the district community for other people to be able to see that information?
I can answer that. I have not put it publicly yet because there are a number of links in there that are internal Google Docs that need to be so they're not editable and so on. And so I'll work through that with Jeff to correct those, and then we can post it publicly.
Okay, well, and again, we could minimally post it and take the links off for now. I think it's important. As you know, the board has gotten a significant number of questions. And I've spent hours and hours and hours researching these issues. And then because of the holidays, I didn't want to send it to Jeff, but I sent Jeff like 3 questions and Dan, and then specifically asked for updated information. And it was incredible. It helped summarize all the work. I mean, I was calling athletic directors because I didn't have this information. And I needed to make this decision, or at least have a discussion to make this decision tonight. So I sincerely appreciate the information that we have. And I appreciate that you did invite the coaches, because I think there was still a pretty significant question about that at 10 o'clock yesterday morning. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate being to hear from them. And I have specific questions for each of them. So thank you guys for being willing to have that discussion with us.
Peter?
Hi, Jeff. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. First off, schools that are playing, and in fall sports, any takeaways, any lessons learned from your discussions? And maybe you don't know what's going on, but have they experienced any health issues? Has there been any other concerns and so on brought up by the other schools in the county who might be doing things like playing outside of Dane County or have other activities going on?
I appreciate the question, Peter. And yeah, I've been pretty well connected, like I said, to the Dane County schools, but also the Badger Conference schools, 16 of them. It's a widespread throughout not only Dane County, but just the southern part of Wisconsin and stuff. The athletic director role is not we do it because we're passionate about it. It's not the last couple of months has not been a very fun role to be in, but that challenge of controlling chaos for us we take it on in different ways and stuff like that. Different pressures and different pushing points that come on us and stuff. We still have a job to get done. And so I got a lot of respect for the peers that I work with and the colleagues, what they're going through, because every day is different for them. Sure, the other schools that in the Badger Conference that have been playing sports right now, they've taken on some challenges. They've had some situations where kids have tested positive and they've dealt with those. But we've grown through those understandings and how to best support them and stuff. I've been out to sporting events that have been going on. And as I left the sporting event, my comments to the athletic director is, but at least you're engaging. You get an opportunity to engage with kids. You get an opportunity to engage with parents. You get an opportunity to engage with officials, coaches, and media. Haven't had that for 10 months. So that's a tough role. And then to take on, in the conversations of frustration and all of that, and why can't we? It is tough because it does come down to where it's not like, that's my choice to not do that. It's the choice of our county in respect for our guidelines and stuff. It puts you in an interesting position. But like I said, other schools, they're dealing with it and they're rolling with it. Our guidelines that we've put into place and shared out collectively have met all those needs, kind of those challenges that have come from this COVID. And I feel like our athletic directors have growing forward, not only in their compassion, but their ability to work through the adversity and also find a way to laugh in kind of what they can control and can't control. And so it's been an interesting year on all of us in the athletic director role, but through it all, it's kind of put us in a different place of understanding and respect for each of us. Rolling forward, understand that whatever decisions we get from our counties or COVID, there's still a lot of work to be done. And that's one thing in our role too, is that we don't shy away from the hard work or the long hour to get it done. And we don't look for the pat on the back or anything like that. We got to get the job done and stuff. So our coaches tonight showing, I got an extension of that work, but then I handed off to our coaches to kind of take it to the next part of it and stuff. So I am proud of the coaches that'll speak to that tonight because their work is ahead of them as well as from our decision tonight as well. Did that answer that?
Sort of. Any coaches want to speak to that question? You don't have to. First of all, I wanted to say I do appreciate that everybody who's come here, all the coaches come here. I know this is a difficult issue. I know that there's a lot of emotion involved and a lot of people with different viewpoints, and to come and speak and to the public and express your opinions and your thoughts about that can be difficult because you have to deal with a wide segment of people, and you might not, and we aren't all going to agree. So I appreciate and understand that you come here to talk to us tonight. Anyway.
Dan Zweifel.
Hey, thanks for everybody for having me tonight. I appreciate it. Peter, I think I can help you with that. So with Edgewood High School, I just know a little bit about their basketball program. They actually go practice 2 or 3 times a week up at Camp Gray up in the Baraboo area. So they actually drive up to Camp Gray, so it's outside of Dane County, and they can have a regular practice outside of Dane County. And then for transportation, they do not take a bus. Their parents drive each kid to the games, drop them off, and then if they're allowed to watch the game, they can. If not, they have to wait and then pick them up after the game. So I don't know if that helps you with that question that you had about what's going on with some of those schools.
Well, part of my question is, has there been any issues with them having to cancel games because of COVID amongst the players and in basketball or other sports?
Yeah, the big one with Edgewood was they made it to the state tournament for girls volleyball, and one of their athletes came down with COVID, and so they had to relinquish their sectional final championship to go to the state. and the team that they actually beat got to go to state instead of them. So that's the biggest one I've heard of for them.
Tyler.
Hi, everybody. Tyler Keel. I'm the head girls basketball coach. Peter, I just wanted to add to what Z said there about the health implications. I think for me, one of the biggest things is just being able to take back control and make it a safer environment. And the situation that Z explained, I think, is a really good example of that. Right now, our kids are already playing outside of Dane County. And without some of the checks about health and the screeners and things like that. And so if a kid does end up having COVID, they're not canceling, those events, and they're still going to participate. And I think that if we can take back some of the control in that regard and are allowed to play outside of Dane County, then we do get the opportunity to make it a little bit more safe. Where if we're scheduled to play a team where there is a case of COVID, we can cancel that game or reschedule. And similarly with our kids, we can just monitor that and make that a little bit more safe.
Carl.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate Tyler's point there, because I can tell you we've got a handful of wrestlers that are definitely out there on the club scene that are, they're not, the club side of it isn't following the guidelines to the maximum extent, and being able to take that back and control it and mitigate that exposure to the level that should be out there is definitely something that I'm looking forward to doing and putting that in a place where we can get to the level to compete. So just like Tyler said, there's many athletes, especially on the wrestling team, that are doing it right now in a very less controlled environment.
What percentage would you estimate are playing club sports of those 180 students?
I can tell you on the wrestling team, there's probably, we got 20 guys. There is 6 of them that are going on the club side pretty strong right now.
Elizabeth?
I'm sorry.
Thanks. Oh, Peter, do you have another question?
I got Elizabeth.
Well, can I finish up just my quick questions quickly?
Man, how many questions you got, Peter?
That's fine.
I only said 3.
Yeah.
Jesus, man.
You go, Peter.
Right,
I can wait my turn.
Here's my question. Have we has the coaches, have you guys looked at modifying any of the sports so that you can have compliant competitions? Have you thought of, has that been an issue at all? Have coaches talked about any ways to modify things so that you can have competitions? That's not been a thought. Guess
like
not.
Carl, and then Kelly, and then Dan.
So Peter, I would ask for clarification on the question, and to the level, the extent of, yes, we've looked very in depth. I can speak from a wrestling standpoint as far as practice, running socially distanced practice for wrestling. We've had to get really creative with some of the things that we're going to do, and I've had practice doing that with our youth club. One of the examples is last night I got really creative with a dodgeball for the kids to use in a socially distanced environment. Now, and we're going to continue to do those things in the small groups that Jeff talked about. But when it comes to actually competing in wrestling, I know a lot of you might realize that out of all the sports out there, the one that is probably the highest risk is going to be wrestling. I agree with you there, but there's a lot of modifications that the WIAA and USA Wrestling have set forth prior to the event and after the event. And when I say event, I'm talking about that one individual match. Right now, there are high schools wrestling and kids are wearing masks while they're wrestling. And one example of, you might think, well, it's going to fall off right away. Well, I can tell you, like Lodi is wrestling right now, and they've went to a mask that has a Velcro in the back to secure it on the athlete's head. So that's one thing we could look at doing in our kids. The WIAA recommends that kids are wearing masks while they compete. And so we'll look at wearing those type of masks when we compete. So that's one modification to mitigate the exposure as far as handshakes and stuff like that. All that stuff's been eliminated. The socially distance of benches, the way we run weigh-ins, there's no handshakes. Literally the only contact that would happen is that 6 minutes during the match. And the kids would be wearing even warm-ups, right? Like if you've ever been to a wrestling event, kids are out there and they're warming up and drilling with each other. None of that would be happening. It would literally be the 6 minutes that they would wrestle, and they would wrestle with a mask on, and they would use hand sanitizer before and after. So if that's what you're looking for, yeah, there's some things, but not the in my sport, not the actual wrestling. The only thing that would change is that they would be wearing a mask.
And you have a 15-yard penalty for face masking, right?
Right. Or a penalty point, right?
And then actually, Jeff, one thing had struggled with your presentation. So the last question here, we're talking about two things. One, we're going to have a winter sports season regardless, and two, your options 2 and 3 is if we allow competitions outside of Dane County. How much difference is there going to be between those two situations in terms of the way the season looks like? I think basically what you're saying is for most of the other sports, we'll have the practices and then the tournament. And then we might, but in addition to that, we could have competitions out of Dane County. Could you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I will. And I'll answer a question too. We're looking at virtual opportunities in the sports of gymnastic and swim, where we wouldn't leave our facility, but we would compete with another school virtually. And so I'm working with those coaches if we set it up and have the officials come in and kind of set that stage in our own environment for our student athletes to have it replicate an actual meet or a duel. We can do that safely within our own box and then bring those scores together to score that out. In swimming, we're looking at a conference, the Dane County schools, the Badger Conference schools in Dane County, we're looking at coming together and hosting an invite virtually. And so our coaches we're getting that in front of them right now and trying to make that happen and make that a good experience for our kids. That's an experience they probably wouldn't have had in a normal season. So that's kind of neat. But to answer your question, our coaches will speak to this. Competition brings out talking points that a practice cannot. To put a kid in a competition and have a situation happen, that opens up a whole lot of opportunities to connect through sports to our student athletes and stuff. And so the benefit of participating in competition, our coaches will share with you that they're excited to get to that and allow that happening. When we go in groups of 10, there's not much we're going to be able to do. Sure, we can do some skill development. We can do different drills and stuff, but it's not going to get close to the opportunities that you can get through competitions and stuff. And when you look at where the high school kid is in sports, you got to take advantage of those opportunities through competition to kind of stretch the conversation. And that to me is, that rides along the lines of the strength of athletics is you take advantage of all the opportunities that you can get and stuff. Does that answer it?
Yeah, it does. It's helpful. But, I was also wondering, could you do 3-on-3 games or something like that? Does that make any sense to do that kind of thing?
I'll let those guys talk to that.
Go ahead, Dan Zweifel and then Tyler.
Yeah, unfortunately, Peter, we won't be allowed to do 3-on-3 with our groups of 10. We can have partners one-on-one, but we'll not be able to do 3-on-3. And I'd like to reiterate what Jeff has said before. The first step, and we're back in December, was to do small groups. And I think everybody loved that. I applaud Mr. Olson and Mr. Schreiner for letting us do that. But let's be honest, the kids, they want to wear the Columbia blue and silver uniforms. They want to wear those striped pants when they go. They want to see how they compare to other people their age around the state. And that's what the thrill of extracurricular activity is, whether it's in the pool, on the wrestling mat, in the gymnastics, Turners. That's what these kids really want to do. They want to wear Monona Grove colors. They'd rather play for Monona Grove than to do a club team. All right. At least that's what I hear from them. If they had a choice, they'd rather play for Monona Grove and compete against other schools. And I think, we have opportunity tonight to let that happen if we can.
Yeah, and then I would just add I think your question originally was what would be different, or how would it be different between the small groups and the being able to play. And just from my perspective and talking to some of the kids, I do think it would be very different. And the way that I think about it is actually the way that we talk about a lot within our program. And that is, we have a bigger purpose, right? When we're working with kids, and our bigger purpose is to help grow them into adults and teach them a lot of those life skills. And through a sport, you reach that purpose by trying to get an objective, and that's winning games. And by trying to work together as a team to win a game, that's where you learn some of those other pieces. And so if we're just doing small groups, we will make it. Like, I look at some of the coaches that are in this meeting, and I'm sitting with like some legends here, and I know that they are going to be super creative and make it a good experience, but it would not be the same experience as if we're allowed to take kids and play competitions, simply because it just increases that engagement and it increases the purpose that we are able to reach with some of those kids.
Let me get Kelly, because she was waiting for a while, and then I'll go to you, David Kinsler. Kelly, did you have anything?
I was just going to comment, and Jeff kind of took what I was going to say about the modified competitions and having virtual meets. When we look at swimming being different in that it has the individual aspects, unlike the other sports that we have here, we are able to isolate ourselves. So having the virtual meets has been a really nice talking point as of late. So I was going to address that. I'll let Dave Kinsler talk.
All right.
Well, first off, thank you for everybody to allow us to be here. Administration, oh my gosh, I hope that the school board has issued you guys a really double-vested Kevlar vest for all the things that you guys have had to go through. But Peter, to answer your question, we aren't allowed to have any competitions of any sort in Dane County. So to go outside of Dane County, everybody else is still playing competitions exactly the way they're being played right now, and they have been played in the past. So I'll take the game of hockey. Every place but Dane County is playing hockey, and they're playing it with 20 kids plus. And for us to do some kind of a modification or et cetera, we're not allowed to intertwine or commingle our 10. And it's a 6-foot distancing rule within our county right now for us to even participate. So, I mean, I love it. I think I first heard the swimming thing tonight, phenomenal. Isn't that awesome? They came up with a great idea, and it'd be great, Peter, if we were able to, within limitations, come up with 3-on-3 hockey on a full sheet of ice in Dane County, but that's not allowed right now for us to even do small area games, to compete one-on-one, to, to have that 6-foot distancing. We're basically in a drill aspect for hockey-wise in our groups of 10. So I hope that clarifies a little bit of that, but that's how I heard it. Maybe I didn't hear it correctly.
By the way, are they playing in Milwaukee?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, I can't. I don't know that. I know that hockey-wise, they're playing in the burbs, so they're playing like in Ozaki County. The WOWs,
Right.
the WOW, they're playing in WOW.
Okay.
Waukesha,
Right.
Ozaki, et cetera, all the way around Milwaukee for sure. And I
Right.
know that the Pettit Center in Milwaukee is hosting hockey.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's in Milwaukee County or just outside of Milwaukee County where State Fair Park is.
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
I can,
It's
Dave,
just
I
a
can
matter of
add
the
to that.
population density of those.
Yeah, Ozaki County is actually in, the Ozaki rinks, the Cedarburg rinks are in Ozaki County, not
Right.
Milwaukee County, and they have 2 rinks, and they've been playing since the rinks opened. And Dave Kinsler's, one of his players is coaching 3 teams right now, and they have played at least 2 teams of also former players. And to answer Peter's question, they have had positive COVID tests in a coach and then in a student, but they didn't occur very much like the school occurrences of the positive COVIDs. They didn't occur or receive the COVID positive test from a tracing from that team. They had it somewhere else and then brought it, and they quarantined the kids immediately, and none of those players or other coaches tested positive. That's why we were able to see Stuart at Christmas, because he and Nolan got their test back on Christmas Day. And the other thing that I think is interesting is that one of the questions was, if you're playing on a club team right now, and I think Tyler spoke to this, what does it mean to play on an MG team, and would you give that up? And again, we've been there. Our kids were playing for gold medalist Bobby Suter and wanted to play Monona Grove, Dave Kinsler. So they passed up those opportunities to be there and to wear Columbia blue.
Peter, to follow up on your question, the community at large that's watching us all speak right now, my phone is just blowing up with a few text messages telling me, yes, hockey is being played in the county of Milwaukee. So that's from the community letting us know outside of what's going on.
Okay. Elizabeth, did you have anything?
I did. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Jeff. So I think there are a couple of things now that I've been able to hear everyone speak. And, I 100% agree and want to reiterate everyone else's gratitude towards you, Jeff, and the coaches for being here. And I agree around the idea of competitions being sort of like this larger purpose, right? I mean, that's like the whole point of practicing, so that then you can have competition, so that then you can, learn from what went well and what didn't go well, and then go back to practice and recondition. I mean, that's sports, right? As I understand how sports work. And so I appreciate us making that distinction. I also, and then I'll get to my question for you, Jeff, that I've had for a while, but I also just want us to be clear as a board that if we allow students to play winter sports and compete, they're going to play, but if we allow them to compete in winter sports, we will have a student or a staff person that tests positive for COVID. The probability is just there. And so I think it might be worth our time to think about the level of risk that we're willing to take on and assume to take on. And that's, I think, why Mike is here to help us navigate that and talk about that. Because I guarantee you, if you called any of those athletic directors, they'll have a story, whether that was contact traced to the sport or not. It's out there, right? We're in community spread. And so the probability that an athlete or a coach or a parent that's observing is going to have COVID, the probability of that just seems so low that it sort of, to me, it doesn't feel like a useful exercise in the time that we have to think about the individual instances of that happening in this particular area or that particular area. Now, that being said, Jeff, here's my question for you. In the spirit of competition, actually, tell me a little bit more about what the opportunities are for girls hockey, because when I look on the matrix, they're the only ones that aren't listed as having a team or a game goal. So I know we're in a co-op, but I'm curious about that one in particular, and what opportunities there may be for our female student hockey player athletes.
You're on mute, Jeff.
Yeah, I do that so everyone can remind me. So thanks. Our girls, it's not a co-op. We actually have 7 schools that are in but we call it a co-op because I don't know if they've given it another term. But anyway, a lot of those girls made the decision to skate out. The ice that we buy and the come together rink that we have is in Stoughton. And so administratively, we share responsibilities with all the athletic directors of the schools involved. And we don't want to have like in hockey now, we don't want to have a girls program have anything different than the boys program in terms of opportunities, but our numbers are different. Where Dave has strong numbers on the boys side, our girls numbers a couple of years ago, we were not sure if we were going to have enough numbers to fill the team. And so as those numbers come and go with that, they're in a different place than the boys, but yet we provide those opportunities. So where we were at right now is our numbers at Monona Grove, we're looking to grow this year. And on a normal year, we would have probably had our largest number of female students represented going into this cooperative program. But because of where they're at in terms of play with hockey, the decision respectfully was made to go the club route instead of the school route, because in Dane County, the restrictions that are there. So we have 1 student that was going to not play on the club and stay with the program. McFarland, Stoughton, they have different numbers as well. What we looked at as athletic directors is to provide an opportunity on the ice in these small groups of 10 by talking with our boys coaches to say, can we share ice with you and involve these female student athletes in your practices and stuff? And so we were looking to find a place for them, and we would still do that if allowed to do that kind of going forward for any of our girls.
Great, thank you, Jeff. That was going to be my follow-up question, is whether or not they'd have an opportunity, the girls who wanted to skate with the boys.
Yes.
Eric.
I'm sorry, Jeff, was that answer yes, they would?
Yes.
Okay.
They will have an opportunity, yes.
Because Jesse Vetter did play on the boys team. 2 Olympic silver medals.
Eric.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Dan and Jeff, for getting this meeting set up, and the rest of the board members for meeting, as well as the coaches, and most importantly, the student athletes who have advocated to play sports this year. I have a couple clarifying questions. The first one is for you, Jeff. I'm just, so I understand this, when you say virtual swimming, they're still competing. They're just competing at our school. The other school is competing at their school, and then they're compiling the scores. So when I heard you say virtual, I was like, well, how can you do virtual swimming? I just want to understand. They're actually swimming. They're actively involved in the sport. And the virtual piece is the scoring piece, rather than being in the same place, you're doing it separately. Is that correct?
Correct. We'd set up our timing system. We'd bring in an official and make it an official meet, but it's going to be virtual against a team that's not in our pool.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting. I'm glad that they can do that. That's great. Second question also for you, Jeff, and maybe some of the coaches. In the plan, following the WIAA protocols, safety protocols and guidelines, and Jeff, you mentioned that there could potentially be additional guidelines specific to Monona Grove in our school district. Are there any guidelines like that are already, part of what would happen if we were to approve this? Or what would that be in addition to what's already in place with WIAA?
And here's the thing is, let's say, for example, if we're playing Baraboo, Baraboo would share with me their guidelines for administering an event. I would look through those to see if anything would jump out at me that, for my comforts, that I wasn't comfortable with, and we would address those before going to that event. I say that because in the fall, when our fall sports were going on, the schools that were playing, some of that was pressing out. And we didn't have some of the strong mandates that we have now. We didn't have those in the fall. And so it was one where, as some schools, as we were loading up this winter season, some schools were saying, hey, understand, if we're coming to your place to play, we have to be in a common place of understanding and agreement, or else we might not come in. And that's just local control, respect, and stuff. And so with the allowance to play outside of Dane County, we'd be looking at their guidelines just to assure that we're comfortable with those as we're rolling in there. But we've come a long way with these guidelines and stuff too. I'm not sure if anything would be jumping out. What some of our coaches and people have been sharing too is, when you play in clubs outside of Dane County and stuff, the mask rule. Some events are going on without masks, and some programs will show up in masks and stuff, but the other ones aren't. And in the fall, we had more of that going on, and it was uncomfortable for some schools to roll in where they're mandating certain guidelines into another school's gymnasium, and they weren't mandating that. It created a lot of back and forth with discussions between schools that, I think we're in a better place now.
Tyler, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just had another example beyond the guidelines that are, sport specific that WI puts out. I talked to the DeForest girls basketball coach, and he shared their plan with me. And one of the things, or another example, would be something like DeForest is not allowing their fans to travel to the games. And so the games will just be live streamed. So that's not WIA guideline, but as an example of something that we could say, oh, no, our fans are not allowed to travel or something like that. That would just be another example.
I have one more quick question, Susan. It's not really a question. It's just, I just want to understand, this is to all the coaches, that if the board was to approve playing outside of Dane County, are you ready to go as far as things with scheduling, safety precautions, and practicing? Are you ready to go with those things? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Dan
Dan Sweet
has his hand up, but you're on mute, Dan.
Oh, no, it's Susan Manning had a question. And
I thought
Yeah,
he was.
I did.
wanted to answer. Yeah.
Eric, I just want to let you know, you guys, school board, should be really proud of our Monona Grove athletes, the basketball players, the ones that are going up to Just a Game. They are actually wearing masks up at Just a Game, and I think we are one of the few schools that are doing it. I know Tyler has asked his kids, and I have asked mine to do it. There's a couple of things, the biggest things I've heard from other coaches are getting used to wearing a mask. That's one thing that kids will need to get used to be able to run, jump, move, and things like that with a mask on. And that takes some time to do. And I think our kids are taking a step forward and getting a jump on that by doing that. So I'm very proud of our kids for taking that and doing that on their own and being kind of a leader in that place of Just a Game. And then as for basketball, Dave set out a bunch of rules. So the benches are really spread apart. There's no more jump ball. There is, there's a coin flip if it goes to overtime. There's no handshake, similar to wrestling. WIAA has done a lot of research and done a lot of things to make it as safe as possible. And for us to get our kids to be in that safe zone is a lot better than them going to a club situation where they're not following all those procedures. Thank you.
That's great to hear.
Susan Manning?
So Jeff, could you just tell me, when I researched the guidelines and talked to other school districts, it sounded to me like they were actually running, that you are able to run swim meets with other teams for individual events. You couldn't run relays. So for instance, my understanding was if you left a lane between two freestylers, one from Edgewood and one from Monona Grove, you could actually run that in our pool. You couldn't run the relays. Is that correct?
I can answer that. No, it's not, because competitions in Dane County are subject to the mass gatherings requirement. So you can have no more than 10 students at a time in the pool.
I understand that. If I have 4 freestylers and 4 timers and a coach, and I'm only letting them in at a certain time, I mean, you schedule 4 freestylers and maybe they, again, I'm looking at things like All City and then state swimming, and they can accommodate that 10 number. I understand the 10 number, but I still am under the understanding, unless I'm missing something here, that as long as you follow the 6 feet, they don't have to wear the mask in the pool, is that correct? And you limit it to 10 in the pool area, that you could run limited competitions. Like, let's say you do the freestyler between 9 and 10, and the breaststrokers between 10. I know that's difficult. I'm just asking the question, like yes or no.
Kelly might be able to answer that.
So to clarify, I'm hearing, can we run a actual meet versus a virtual meet? Is that correct?
Yeah, but it would be very, very limited and very difficult to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's my impression under the
we
Dane
have,
County.
yeah,
Dane
we have
County rules.
8 lanes and they're 8 feet across. So one kid being in one lane and one in another, we're following our social distancing just fine. We run into issues with blocks and sharing the starter block when they clearly cannot wear a mask when they're about to dive in. So that is where we have a little bit of an issue. I know that Our team is pretty small. We have 16 kids. One of those is a diver that unfortunately does not have a diving well and isn't able to dive right now. But I would say most teams are very similar to that size, so we could potentially do it.
But you couldn't do relays, right? You could only
do
the
relays, and it would be difficult to transition from one event to the next and having that rotation between lanes and getting that figured out would be very challenging.
Very difficult.
And
Sure.
the time that it would take to set it up would be pretty tremendous. But
Okay.
I think it's doable in the fact that it's pretty low risk. And
I think my question is it allowable? And then you get to the point of, but I don't think we could do it. So I totally understand that. But I was just trying to clarify if it was allowable, because I'm trying again to then transpose that to the other sports. Thank you very much for your help.
Okay, was there any more, Lorraine?
Yes, I have a question, kind of piggybacking off of Eric. So it sounds like safety protocols are in place if we play outside of Dane County for students. But my question is more for the coaches, since you're directly involved. Do you have any concerns or reservations regarding safety if you play outside of Dane County? And if so, are there any modifications that you would have to make for yourselves?
Tyler?
I guess the easy answer is no. I'm not concerned enough to not do it, I guess is the more correct way to answer. Obviously, we are in a pandemic, and so I don't want to say I'm not concerned, because it is a virus that can be caught by myself, and who knows what would happen. But I think it's more about weighing risks, and just for me personally, I would have no problem taking what I think is a small risk so that the kids can play.
Carl?
Yeah, so I totally agree with Tyler. And so a little bit of background about myself, because I am an off-staff coach, but I think I have a background that is kind of applicable to what we're talking about. I spent 4 years as a OSHA compliance officer, and I recently resigned from that job to be a stay-at-home dad, but now I work out at the 115th Fighter Wing in the safety office. So while I was a compliance officer and in my daily job, I deal with basically, just like Tyler said, is the risk mitigation of COVID so we can execute the mission at the 115th Fighter Wing. And right, so exactly what he said is the things that we have in place to mitigate those, the risk and the exposure. I don't have any concern with myself. I mean, yes, there's some risk that we're taking, but with everything and all the knowledge I've dealt with COVID and at the OSHA level and at the fighter wing, I think we've got a really, really, really strong plan.
Dan Zweifel?
Yeah, although we will be taking risks, I'm 50, I have asthma, I have two parents who are in their 80s. I've already told them I probably won't see them for a while, but I think like myself, I'm a Monona Grove graduate, and our other coaching staff here is we always kind of do what's best for the kids of Monona and Cottage Grove. And I think that's what we're here to do. We're here to build those kids up. And that's a risk it's worth taking for me, is to make the Monona Grove kids the best that they can be.
Kelly?
I would say I'm very torn. I would say I'm 50-50 and passionate in both ends, and that I want to be safe, and I think I want to be careful and be cautious about COVID. But then there's also the side of me that is incredibly passionate about the swimming program that I've developed over these years. And as a competitor myself, I know how important a carrot is, carrot being competition. And when we look at modifications and things that we can do about that, is I'm fortunate and I have an assistant coach as if I'm not comfortable going to something, he is able to step in. I have parents that have coached before and would be able to step in. So I think within our program, whatever we need to do to make things happen, we can make that happen. I don't think anybody would be pushed out of their comfort zone, and I'm thinking of myself a little bit when I say that. So I think modifications can be made, and we have a support from Jeff in doing what's best for us and for our program that has been voiced many, many, many times and in every conversation repeated. So looking at, the risks, looking at what we built, as coaches and what we hope to accomplish, I think it's very understandable that things can be taken care of and we can do what's best for
them. Okay. Eric?
This question is for Mitch. Mitch, how do you feel about, moving forward if the student athletes were to play sports outside of Dane County as the principal of the high school, since these sports are all in the high school sports?
Yeah. So if that's the direction that we decide to do, I feel very comfortable based on the plan that Jeff laid out here tonight. I think that plan answered a lot of the questions in terms of protocols and logistics, what that would look like. So I think there's a clear picture on what that would look like. Hearing from our coaches, knowing our coaches in terms of implementation and doing their best to ensure that students are following those protocols, and we'd be implementing that plan in the safest way possible. I'm comfortable with those pieces.
Could we hear from Coach Kinsler?
I just reiterate exactly what the coaches have said. I do have members of my staff that are questioning whether they would come back and do it because of exactly what Dan just said and what Kelly was talking about, the impacts that might be on their immediate family. And I think that Mr. Schreiner put together some good things for us to go through. We went through looking at our COVID. We went through a COVID plan. I think that what we're trying to do is give kids an opportunity. We're actually very fortunate in hockey that our state organization on youth is called WIAA, and our high school is WIAA. They actually came together, which is really rare for them to even get close to being on the same page. And they made it possible so kids could actually participate. And it was really around Dane County. And it's amazing what people have done to put things in place. And as we become more knowledgeable in COVID, we just have to protect ourselves the best we can. And, good things will happen, hopefully, and we can protect ourselves with the protocols that we have in place. And I'm good with what we have put in place. And I coached under the WIAA regulations, and they put in great parameters, just like WIAA have, and just like our administration has, to make sure kids are trying to play as safe as possible. So our kids have been playing safe right now. They've played many games already. They still have games on the schedule. We've been very fortunate in hockey that we can actually flow from WIAA into WIAA play and potentially flow back if we have to. And it's a tribute to our parents, our organization, and to state organizations being able to dovetail all those stipulations together. So it's all good.
Eric and then Susan Fox.
I was curious to maybe hear from Mike. I don't know, Susan, if you had another question before that, but my question was going to be, the WIAA has a medical clearance form. So would that be a form that we would be using? And to Mike, what would be the, medical legalities of using such a form like that? I don't know, Susan, if you want to go before.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the next part is going to be Mike. So I just had a comment more, and thank you for Lorraine for asking that question, because I read through all the materials. I really appreciate all the coaches, not only for being here tonight, but all the work you've done on your individual team plans and protocols. It was really helpful to read through those. They're very thorough. And I was happy to see the WIAA ones too, in terms of requiring masks and that kind of thing. So, back to that comment that if the kids are playing within WIAA rules and our rules, it is a safer environment than what a lot of them are currently in. So just want to thank you. And I also appreciate, Kelly, your comments that, and Dave, you just mentioned you have some coaches who may not want to go back, but if you have some plans where you can compensate, you have an assistant coach who can step in or somebody else who can step in. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm glad to hear that as well. So thank you for that as well, Kelly. All right, I'm finished now.
Peter?
I do appreciate people, saying, well, that they're comfortable with the risk. And I know a lot of, particularly for parents or students, the risks are individually low. But I do want to state that this would be easy if we all got to just choose whether we're at risk, what our acceptance of level risk, and we could do that. But that's not the case here. The case that we have to consider is that these aren't individual decisions, that what we decide here may have impacts on the entire community. And whether an individual is comfortable with that, with the risks that they may be taking, the problem we have is that it is not, this pandemic is not something that gives us a choice to individually assume these risks and have the fallout from that fall only on our own shoulders, unfortunately.
Tyler?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with that because after I talked, I didn't want to make it seem like I was portraying that I thought this was, like a really easy decision, or that the risk was low or not significant. And I guess just to kind of follow up and then also, talk a little bit about that, I would love if Dane County Public Health had some more data on the spread in sports. And I haven't seen a whole lot of that. And from what we've seen, that has shown that sports hasn't been involved in a lot of the spread of the virus. Obviously, like Susan brought up before, that kids have had it on teams, but not necessarily got it from the actual playing of the sports. And the thing that Dan shared with us before with 2C from Dane County Public Health talked about how they had weddings where things were spread. And so again, I guess wanted to follow up that I totally agree with you, Peter. It's not an individual choice. I just wanted to answer that as an individual. But at the same time, it does seem like if we follow these guidelines, that the risk level of also spread seems to be low just from the information that we have.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
Peter, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, that's partly why we are who we are, is that we're on the front lines. We're trying to do that for kids. But I got to tell you also, choice for parents, like in hockey right now, we got about 90% of our kids are already playing club. There are parents that chose not to play club because of that risk, right? And they chose not to do that and not to participate. And to be able to have those choices individually has been the best thing in place, because as you know, some people will choose to risk, those will choose not to. One of the biggest things, the caveats that I see on this whole deal, is the honesty of reporting and the honesty of parents keeping their kids home when they're ill, and the horror stories that we've all heard in other school districts where parents, they got to go to work and they're sending their sick kids to school, and all of a sudden the school's out for 2 weeks or 14 days or what have you. I mean, and I think that goes right back to what Tyler said. If we're involved and we're trying to mitigate and take those things into effect, we're just another checks and balance that's been put in place to help keep people healthy while they're playing the sport. But and hockey, I got to lean on it again. WIAA and parents have done a really, really good job hockey-wise. Like Dan had the horror story of, up at in the Dells. That's not what's going on. There's been a couple instances, but hockey has 3 or 4 officials right on the ice. kids are in, they're out. They can, they might have an exemption for asthma, et cetera. They got to prove that, all those types of things. So there's a lot of things already in place. So I won't segue too far.
Kelly?
And I'd also kind of add in off that, Dave, is that swimming has the really low risk aspect to it as well. So where I'm kind of cautious already, I'm perfectly coaching a sport that has that low risk opportunity and where we can create an environment. And the aquatic directors, our aquatic director, Laura, and those that she's been communicating, working with, have really been staying on top of things. And I feel very confident in their ability to create a meet opportunity for us virtually, but also potentially with another team.
We can go ahead. Dan Olson is okay. We can go ahead and move on to Mike Joker. He's been patiently waiting.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. So first of all, thank you all for spending time in your comments, our coaches, Jeff and Mitch as well. And I do appreciate that. And hopefully our board has a really good, clear understanding now about what our athletic programs are about as far as what we have in place, what could be in place. And so I think those are really important for you to understand in your decision making. So next we'd like to turn to Mike, and you may recall that this board had a couple discussions, but kind of an in-depth one a couple months ago about the liability risk. And at that time, I'd shared some information with you from another attorney that was general guidance. It was not specific to our school district about some liability concerns. And so Mike has prepared for you tonight specifically for our district and things for you to consider in this decision making. And so I'll let him speak for himself and turn it over to Mike Jelka.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, board, for inviting me. Dan, do you intend to share my outline, or would you prefer not to do that?
I certainly can. I mean, the board has given a copy of it. If it's easier to share while we go through, I'd be glad to do that.
Well, let me ask the board then, because if anybody raised their hand that they'd like to have it shared, it's easy to do. So, okay.
We did receive that in the email, correct, Dan?
Yeah,
I don't know that it was posted.
But
We did get that in the email. We just got it, and there may be some board members that might need addiction, legal dictionary with that. So
yeah, that'd be great. I'm only on one screen today, so I like to have it in front of me.
Sure, be glad to.
Thank you.
So what I have been asked to do and understand, this is from the perspective of legal counsel and thinking from the legal aspects primarily, but understanding that this is obviously, as you folks have discussed so eloquently, this is this incredible trade-off between opportunity and health. And I really need to disclose right off the bat that some of you may know this, that for the last 18 years, I've coached girls basketball at Memorial High School here in Madison. So, and certainly Jeff has seen me more than once in the Monona Grove gym. So I have a perspective on this from that I'm not going to allow to influence me here, but I'd feel badly if somebody later on said, "Hey, wait a minute, what's he doing talking about this as a basketball coach?" So this is purely from the legal perspective, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have. I think the starting point is the July 27 board action, which I looked at and makes very clear that the action of the board was that the district will rely upon, quote, guidelines and requirements set forth by CDC, DHS, and Public Health Madison-Dane County. So I think my understanding is that's the status quo. And so from the standpoint of where are you, that is where you are. And those words, guidelines and requirements, certainly are very broad and encompass quite a bit. The next point in the outline is the different kind of regulatory components that come into play here. And the first three, which are statutes, regulations, rules, orders, mandates, those three, I would say as a lawyer, those are obligatory. So to the extent that there are orders, and that's the one piece of this in this discussion that I didn't hear a lot about, and that is the face mask order. Okay, so from that standpoint, that's an order that from the standpoint of my understanding of the governor's order, that's something that is a compulsion that is applicable to everybody. And certainly I would not give a legal opinion that would deviate from that. Once you get to paragraph D, though, that's where it gets more complicated, because there are, from time to time, you're going to see things that are termed strong recommendations or just recommendations, or in the case that we're dealing with right now, the paragraph that Dan shared with you at the beginning, and maybe I should say Dr. Olson shared with you at the beginning of this, in capital letters said, do not recommend in terms of going out of Dane County for athletics. And that comes later as we start talking about what some of the risks are if that is the position of Dane County, I'm sorry, of Public Health Madison-Dane County. Also, we have different components, as Dr. Olson mentioned, where we're to put things in place to the greatest extent possible. Those are all meaningful standards that need to be taken into account from a legal perspective, and yet they're not the same as statutes, regulations, rules, or orders, or other kinds of mandates. But they do play a role in terms of the decision making as far as the potential for liability goes. So moving then from the standpoint of looking at those, there's no hard and fast kind of consideration that goes in to starting with D going down. In terms of a legal perspective, I think that the obvious, the lawyer would say, well, to the extent that you can comply with any recommendations or guidance, you are in a much safer spot from a legal perspective, but it is not one that necessarily is the same as with regard to statutes, regulation, rules, and orders. So I think that dividing line is important. The potential for legal actions in the public sector, you must, if somebody's going to bring a legal action, they have a duty to file a notice of claim prior to bringing a legal action. So any legal action would come before the board for action. My guess is some of you longstanding board members have had those claims come before you where you've had to act and decide whether or not to honor the claim or to reject it and defend the district. The most prevalent kinds of legal action would be for negligence, and the allegation would be that, look, you've got a duty of care to every one of your students, and whatever caused, let's just talk about COVID, some student to be affected by COVID constituted a breach of that duty. It was caused by your whatever action that you're taking with regard to, let's say, playing sports outside of Dane County, and that action, that breach of the duty was foreseeable because you heard from Dane County, Public Health Madison-Dane County, you heard from them that they do not recommend that you do it from that. So therefore it was foreseeable, not only as to the student, but also as to the effect on coming when those kids come back into Dane County in the community spread component of that. And therefore there are damages which have been suffered along the way by whomever it is that's affected. That's the kind of case that would normally be brought. If it's brought at all, if we would unfortunately ever get into a situation like that. As far as employees go, there's workers' compensation is typically the sole kind of legal action that an employee can bring, and so you're pretty much relegated there. So the negligence is primarily by people other than employees, and the workers' comp would be an action brought by employees. If you go to the next. And I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can. You folks have been incredibly diligent and patient here. So then you get into, okay, if those kinds of actions are brought, what are the defenses that you would have in these situations? And the first offense under negligence is that whoever it is that's trying to prove those components on the prior page simply has failed to prove all the elements, that what you've done has been reasonable, or that in fact somebody brought up the causation component, that there hasn't been a link to the sport itself, that's sure there may have been a COVID infection, there might have been a positive test, but there's no way to say that it was caused by the actions that were involved in the sporting activity. And then Wisconsin is a comparative or contributory negligence state, which means that to the extent that for somebody to get relief for a negligence action, the in this case the district would have to be found negligent at least more than 50% or more of whatever the allocation of negligence was. So if the athlete or the parent was also negligent in how he or she conducted him or herself, but the program involves some kind of negligence, you compare, and the only way the district is ultimately liable is then if it's over 50%, and then it's only liable for the percentage that exceeds the other components of whoever else might be negligent. I know we're getting kind of into legal weeds here, but these affirmative defenses are important because they speak to, well, what are some of the things we could do to protect ourselves if we're going to authorize competition outside of Dane County. One would be that you would give people a notice of the risk, and you would give a formal notice of risk to athletes and to the parents, and they would then, you would use later on that, wait a minute, they knew the risk that they were engaged in. And Mr. Kinsler, Coach Kinsler spoke to that in terms of some of the kids as to whether or not they're playing club sports or not. They understand the risk and they're deciding not to do it. And you certainly could do a notice of risk to athletes and to parents. You could also have them acknowledge a risk. You, as a part of your protocol in Monona Grove, I'm not sure you know this or not, but in order for an athlete to participate in sports already in your district, the parents must sign an acknowledgement of risk. That is part of the registration process for sports, and Jeff can speak to that as necessary. But that is a part of every parental packet that goes to an athlete in order to even be eligible to compete. Now, if you were going to do an acknowledgement of risk in the situation we're in right now, I would not rely on that acknowledgement of risk. I don't think that acknowledgement speaks to the COVID aspect of this directly. And I think that if you were going to use an acknowledgement of risk with parent or an assumption of risk with parent, where the parent actually says, and not only do I acknowledge the risk, but I assume the risk, you would want to do something that I think would be much more COVID related. You've probably heard about waivers that are out there, and certainly Jared checked in with your insurance carrier, and the insurance carrier, very much like I am in our office, is very much of a mind that waivers of liability are almost unenforceable in Wisconsin. They just don't work. I can pretty much guarantee you they're not going to work in this situation as a waiver of liability. But there is some advantage to that in that, again, if a parent is willing to sign a waiver of liability, it's very hard for that parent to argue later on that they didn't know what the risk was. And that then gets into this comparative contributory negligence component. Have they then contributed to whatever has occurred? And then there's the indemnity of liability, which is a form whereby a parent would not only waive liability for the district, but then would say, should the district be liable in any way, the parent would then, in effect, reimburse the district for any of the liability that might occur. And I think that's a real stretch to ask a parent to whose kid it might be out for a sport to say, and oh, by the way, if something happens to my kid and the district is liable, we will then reimburse the district for whatever the damages are for that liability. But I do think the risk A, B, and C there are elements of that districts are using. and certainly comply with the idea that you've got from your insurance carrier, which says that a waiver is probably not enforceable, but it also is a good indicator to the to anybody down the line as to that the parent knew what kind of risk there was. It is important for you to know that there is statutory immunity that does exist in Wisconsin for public school districts, and that what that means is that all of your discretionary acts as a school board, discretionary acts of employees, those discretionary acts, you have statutory immunity from any liability. I think that's very important for you to know. So you start with that fact that with discretionary acts, you have statutory immunity. Unfortunately, there is a ministerial duty exception, which means that to the extent you are carrying out a ministerial duty rather than a discretionary duty, that immunity does not apply. So to the extent that we're back to the very beginning of the outline where we were talking about things like regulations or rules or orders, if you are bound by an order that says you are to do something, that's a ministerial duty then that you are bound by. And to the extent that you don't comply with that, you have then forfeited the statutory immunity that you might otherwise have. And then this is really where COVID has brought a whole new world of issue. And that is that for quite some time now, there is what's known as a known danger exception to the statutory immunity. And that is to the extent that a municipality or a public sector body engages in some kind of action where there was a known danger to them when they entered into whatever they were doing, even if it fell within a discretionary act, that they made a decision to do something that was clearly discretionary, but they did it in the context of known danger, that statutory immunity is forfeited. Okay, so I don't think there's any way to ignore the elements of COVID as being the potential for known danger in this situation. We don't have any case law that would tell us that, but the cases that have applied known danger exception and have therefore had public bodies forfeit their statutory immunity certainly have relevance to the kind of situation that we're in. There is a liability cap in the statutes for damages. It's $50,000, and it's certainly something that does come into play. But I mean, nobody wants to get into liability. So I mean, the cap is something that minimizes your liability in terms of dollars. It doesn't minimize the trauma and everything that people go through in these kinds of situations. In talking about immunity, I think most of you know that both the state and the federal government are very much actively engaged in trying to deal with more legislation that would provide COVID-specific immunity. That was one of the last things that got kicked out of the legislation that just got signed by President Trump. That was a huge priority of the Republicans in that relief bill that got signed by President Trump. But the Democrats had some things in that bill that they ended up trading off and dropping both of them. But I think we can look forward to this federal statutory immunity directed at COVID being a very high profile item in the future. Now, whether or not under the new administration that will get any traction or not, I can't say. On the state level, I have worked with WSB. I've actually been in direct contact with the governor's office about the importance of statutory immunity directed at COVID in the environment we're in. And unfortunately, again, with all the else that's out there, it has not had the traction that I think it might otherwise have. But I can guarantee you WSB, WASDA are really, and SAA, School Administrators Alliance, are very much promoting COVID statutory immunity. But the reality is we do not have that. So what does it come down to? It comes down to insurance. And that's, from my standpoint, everything you've talked about today. Whatever direction you go, and whatever protocols you would put in place, I would want to make sure, if I were you, that whatever you were doing, that you had the coverage of your insurance carriers as far as those go, and that coverage would not only be to defend you in any lawsuit, but also to cover whatever damages might be out there. To me, that's the only sure aspect of this. that presents you with the kind of security that you would want from a liability standpoint. There is an indemnity statute that is in play that speaks to the fact that to the extent that any board members or the board itself or any other employees would cause harm within the scope of their duties or scope of their employment and have individual liability, the indemnity statute says that the district would pay those damages. So there's not a lot of risk for individuals. Wisconsin, anybody who works in this state, and I'm a former teacher myself, so I know how important this kind of a statute is, and that is that to the extent that you act within the scope of your employment, you have indemnity by your employer that will then pay any damages that might be attributable to you. Workers' comp, again, the coaches relief would be workers' comp, and there would be procedural and substantive compliance that would be involved. But the big issue there is, in order for them to get relief from workers' comp, they would have to be able to prove causation that it actually happened by way of whatever the school district had put in place. There are some miscellaneous things here at the end that I just thought we've got legal challenges to the state order, to the governor's order. That's pending. We also have the legal challenge to whether Public Health Madison-Dane County has the ability to issue orders. Those things are pending in front of the Supreme Court. And you know, we're waiting for answers on those. I do remind you as a school board that to the extent that those bodies would be relieved of their authority to issue orders, whether those be mask orders, whether those would be requirements to come on property and other kinds of things, you as a school district do have the express authority to approve whatever kind of orders or requirements that you want to put in place regarding access to property, with regard to face coverings by people or whatever. That is totally within your authority to do that. And to the extent that you have any issue about whether or not the courts are going to strike down any of those other orders, I certainly would suggest you consider, if you haven't done so already, adopting some of your own local order or requirements. Plus, you can have orders or requirements that are more specific than what the Public Health Madison-Dane County or the governor's orders are. And then really what it comes down to in the end, just like I said, it comes down to insurance. You want to coordinate with your county health department, and we already know where they are on this. And if you're going to take action with regard, having the knowledge of where they are, which I think you do, but remember, it's a moving target. All the superintendents in Dane County got absolutely ambushed by the change in public health Madison-Dane County and the way they went away from metrics and went to this phase-in. I mean, that was not, well, they had told us they were considering they might be changing things, but that change, I think, caught everybody off guard. So the staying current with the county health department and also staying current with what your insurance carriers will tell you as far as whether there's any effect on coverages with regard to what you're doing. To me, that's the bottom line, as I said earlier. But this is, in the nutshell, essentially where we are from a legal perspective.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Was there any questions for Mr. Joker? Peter?
Well, I just wanted to comment. Thanks that's very comprehensive on this subject. Thanks, Mike, I don't have any questions because I think you've been very comprehensive.
Yeah, I was worried that I was given a summary of a torts course here. So, and only Susan Fox would appreciate all the aspects of that. So,
Elizabeth?
I also appreciated it, Mike. I always appreciate hearing you. So thank you for that. I did have a question, and I think this is less for you and maybe more for Dan and Jared, around the insurance components that Mike brought up, because that seems to be an important thing for us to think about and know in terms of damages and defense.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask Jared to respond because unfortunately it's not a real clear-cut answer. He's had numerous conversations. We've tried to get some things in writing. We've shared some things with Mike. So Jared, do you want to address that?
Why am I not surprised?
Sure.
Thank you, Jared.
So in our conversations, our liability insurance carrier is CIC, and they do represent school districts across the state of Wisconsin. And what they will always continue to tell us is that they continue to recommend that individual districts take the advice and the guidance from their local health officials. But they also understand that there are different county aspects, different county recommendations based on the pandemic, specifically around population density, the number of specific cases that are happening. So when we talk about it being with athletics, we also know that the WIAA has sort of given control over all those events and give the final say on how we participate in those events. So based on that, obviously they are going to follow what WIAA is recommending for us when we look at either basketball or wrestling and some of those changes. But what they'll revert back to is they can't give a blanket statement that everything is covered. Obviously, what they're going to look at is if something comes up, did you look at the specific events and the claim that is being asked for coverage, and then they'll make their determination. But overall, if you're following similar to what Mike had mentioned, you obviously, there is the mask mandate, and if we are continuing to follow that and we're following the CDC recommendations, and we're not purposely going out and saying that we're going to encourage our athletes not to wear masks, and we're going to pack a bus full of students and try to purposely do everything, for the most part, as long as we're following what's being outlined by WIAA and that we're looking and taking advice from our local health officials, they do believe that most things will be covered.
Any other questions? Susan Fox?
So given Mike's comment that even if the state mask mandate is thrown out, and even if the Dane County health requirements are thrown out, as long as we still, as a school district, choose to follow those, we obviously have the authority to do that. So we can still follow that degree of guideline. The question here is, we're clearly not following Dane County's recommendation if we choose to play outside the county. So that to me, that's the question that remains unanswerable, it sounds like. I mean, which I understand why they would not go out on a limb and answer that question in terms of coverage with that.
Well, let me speak to it, because one of the things in Jeff's PowerPoint, and I'm not going to quote from it exactly, but it relates to all the coaches that are on the call, which is the coaches are going to encourage the athletes to use good judgment about how they then interact with people as it would relate to coming back from a competition outside of Dane County. One of the things that is being discussed is whether or not, in situations, if you were to approve competition outside of Dane County, would that also then carry with it some kind of recommendation or suggestion or even obligation for the athletes to engage in virtual instruction only? That way, that the cohort, it becomes much smaller in terms of the potential for transmission. And if you look at very carefully what Dane County public health, I'll say it. If you look at very carefully what public health Dane County, Madison-Dane County is saying, it's that by going outside and competing the county, their concern is the bringing it back into the county. Okay, so if you were to take steps to limit what happens with those athletes who do go out and encourage them, and Jeff, I don't know whether you want to speak to that one item in.
It's like Mike froze.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go. You froze up, Mike.
Okay, I'm sorry. But the one spot in Jeff's PowerPoint speaks directly to encouraging that kind of mitigation, which would also then be in line with exactly the rationale why Public Health Madison-Dane County doesn't want you to be outside. So I don't know if, Jeff, you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I can. Are you talking that slide where it says coaches will strongly encourage their team to keep their bubble to teammates and family only?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just I guess the thinking there is just the duty to inform, as our kids come together in our small cohorts and as we instruct going forward like that, it's just stressing the point that if we are going to go outside of Dane County to do this, we got to understand what all goes with that ability to do that. And you're right, Mike, in terms of bringing that back in, that's the concern there. So putting that there is just that our coaches would be a continuous reminder to our kids and our families through communication that as we do this, we do have to be connected and made aware of what we're doing along those lines. Does that answer that?
Yeah, and it speaks to what I think is something that if you can affirmatively put in place with some objective kinds of criteria about that, is going to mitigate against the argument that you are not complying with the idea of what Dane County Public Health Madison-Dane County is asking for, because then you are trying to negate this transmission of the virus by, as you say, staying within your bubble, communicating, and so on. I just think that's a very compelling point in your plan, is what I'm saying.
Elizabeth, and then Susan Manning.
Yeah, so that was a question I had. So thanks for bringing that up, Mike, in terms of we could theoretically, right? This is my question, modify the eligibility requirements to make that a requirement, right? So right now we're talking about coaches encouraging, which to me feels a little bit more passive than saying, if you want to play, here's what this looks like, and here are the eligibility requirements, and we have the ability to deny you eligibility in the event that we find out you do X, Y, and Z. I mean, we do that for other activities, I would assume, right?
Yeah, the complicating thing here is that that athletes that have disabilities and IEPs and some of the other complicating factors that go on in educating kids, which we've all dealt with ever since last March in terms of how do we deal with the specific circumstances, that could give rise to some complicating factors because you need to take into account some of the specific situations of providing FAPE for those students and so on. But
Right, Susan Manning.
Mike, in the options for the board considerations for tonight, option 2 is the recommended motion from administration is, if that's the choice the board would take, would be to move to authorize the high school administration to schedule and hold competition outside of Dane County for the 2020-2021 high school winter sports teams. I would guess that you would add language to this to add clarity in terms of the liability issue. Is that correct? And what would you add?
Well, I'm not sure. The problem with that is then once you get too specific, then you're into, well, what did I leave out? Okay. And I think, I don't have that right in front of me, but I think the way you just read it, and if I heard it right, it would leave to the administration the implementation of the board action, which, in other words, the board would be acting in a policy directive of saying, hey, we're okay with this, but administration, work that out. And it would be then up to the administration to decide, well, are we going to ask for waivers, or are we going to get any kind of assumption of risk document? What we already have one, but are we going to consider that sufficient? Julka says maybe it isn't as sufficient with COVID as it might be. Are we going to ask for another one? I hear that motion is putting in the hands of the administration the implementation of a policy decision.
So maybe what we would do is just add, if it says move to authorize the high school administration to schedule and hold competition outside of Dane County and to implement action that would mitigate damages, or something that gives them a little more policy language that says that they will do that. So they would be accountable if that didn't occur. Would that be helpful?
I think I'll let Dr. Olson answer that.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Susan. And Mike and I just had a brief conversation. I did not have an opportunity to have him review that in advance. I was kind of on a deadline to try to get this out to the board. But the idea would be that, in my opinion, I'm accountable regardless. That's my job, to make sure that we have all the safety precautions and mitigate risk as much as possible. And so I would say that if the board were to authorize that, I've already had that discussion with Mike about the very first thing we would do is work with his team at Boardman and Clark to determine exactly what type of acknowledgement or waivers and so on, and we would have those in place before any competitions were to begin. So you certainly can add it, but I'll tell you, it will happen regardless of whether it's in the motion or not.
Okay, so let's say, and again, I appreciate Mike's legal thought on this. What if we just added the language and to mitigate risk? Understanding that's an expectation we would have anyway.
I would suggest when we get the motion on the floor, we want to talk about amendments at that point, then we.
Yeah, at this point, Peter, I'm trying to get some legal advice.
Okay.
While we have it available to us, rather than to struggle with it later.
Well, okay, and understand that's a double-edged sword then, okay? Because to the extent that in the motion,
you mitigate risk, right?
You direct the mitigation of risk, the unfortunate victim of something who is a plaintiff is going to then say, and oh, by the way, you had the obligation by motion to mitigating risk, and what you did not do that. So I think everybody understands where you're coming from, and I think like Dr. Olson said, I mean, I can't imagine doing this without having a total backdrop of mitigating risk. But I think it's from the standpoint of how best to implement that is, I think, especially with the moving targets that there are out there right now, with the vaccines coming. And I don't want to overstate that, because we're not going to be talking about those for winter sports. But to the extent that we've got so much in kind of a transition of a lot of this stuff, I think leaving that to administration, if you're comfortable doing that, is the best way to go.
Okay. Thank you. That's exactly what I needed. Thank you.
Okay. So I am going to ask for a motion to move to authorize the high school administration to schedule and hold competitions outside of Dane County for the 2020-2021 high school winter sports teams as presented.
I'll make that motion, Andrew, unless, were you making the motion?
No,
I will make the motion to
All right.
authorize high school administration to schedule and hold competitions outside of Dane County for the 2020-2021 high school winter sports teams.
Second.
All right. Any
Good
further
for you.
discussion?
Yes.
Any further discussion? It says Susan Fox and then Peter. Susan, you're on mute.
Hate that. All right. I would just say that I would be doing this with the assumption that those three, the acknowledgement of risk, the assumption of risk, the waiver of liability, that all of that be part of the, I mean, I trust that our administration will work all of that in. The only comment I thought was interesting from Mike, I mean, not the only comment, but what I hadn't thought about was whether we should require athletes while they're doing this to remain virtual just during that period. I hadn't given that any thought. And I'm just wondering if people have any thoughts about that. I mean, that's something we could, well, it isn't something we could talk about later, really. It's something that I just wonder if people have any thoughts about that. That would be one way. In other words, they're not coming back and they're just coming to the school for practices. They're playing the games, but they're not coming back for in-person classes. It's possible that our in-person classes for high school actually won't even start till it may be kind of a moot point, so maybe that's not even worth discussing.
But it may apply to spring sports.
It would have, right, which currently, you're right.
Well, and if I could interject, what I threw that out as is as it's being considered and it's been put in place in some of the districts over in the Milwaukee area, because I've kind of looked into this a little bit. But in talking to the lawyers that are involved, no one that, to my knowledge, has issued an opinion that says that is exactly how you would do that because of the different deal. So I think I certainly don't want to give you the impression that I'm giving you the opinion that would be a legal option now. Okay.
Okay.
I think it's
actually,
well worth considering.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's interesting.
Peter.
Yeah, I'd like to comment. First of all, we want to recognize that, these things, the various options that Mike gave us, they make it more difficult for someone to prove a case against us. They do no way do they limit or exclude our liability. As he said, liability of waivers are essentially unenforceable. So we do not escape that. The best we can do is make it a little harder for somebody to bring a case against us and to understand what our risks are. If I can paraphrase what you said, Mike, if that's an accurate statement, I think it is. The other thing is, currently we as a board said in July that we were going to follow the Dane County recommendations, and the Dane County recommendations are not, while in Dane County you shall do this. Dane County recommendations is you shall do this. And if we are going to allow, we need to be aware, we need this open eyes. If we are going to allow the sporting events outside of Dane County, it means we are not following the Dane County recommendations, and we are essentially undoing the action we took in July, or the action we took previously to follow the recommendations.
That's not totally true, Peter, because when we voted, there wasn't an athletic portion or piece to that vote. From my understanding, it was the in-person learning plan that we voted on.
We didn't vote to support any particular part of the Dane County health recommendations. We understood, I think at the time, we understood that those were evolving.
It was my understanding it related to the.
I'm sorry, Susan. Let me, if I could finish, please. But I think that we need to acknowledge we're no longer following the Dane County health recommendations that have been made to us. I certainly view it that way. Now, whether or not we do, that's a question, but we need to be honest with ourselves that that's what we're doing, if you ask me. And that's, of course, where this liability and this risk comes into play. The fact that we have a particular recommendation and we're not following those recommendations is what gives the liability risk issue to us, if you ask. Yeah, as I interpret what Mike has said and what I understand. The other thing is, there is this issue, we're number one for me, and I think number one for all of us should be the best thing for our students, the best thing for our community is to get this pandemic behind us, to do what we can to bring this to an end so that we can all go back to normal. And the question is this action, is that compatible with what I think our number one goal should be. And I'm not sure, and I haven't seen any convincing evidence that it is compatible with that. There are reasons for the recommendations, and to be honest, we've seen a lot of progress. And I know people say, well, schools don't cause problems, but if you look at what happened nationally after September 1st, when a lot of schools did reopen, there was an enormous increase in transmission, an enormous increase in community transmission, and an enormous increase in the number of deaths. And we can't minimize, and we shouldn't minimize this. A healthy Madison High School student did die of COVID-19 just last month. Okay, that's a reality. That's a reality we need to be very careful about what we're doing here. And again, to me, the individual risk, and I understand the parents, I understand all And I actually really appreciate all the communications we've heard from parents to understand where they are and understand how important these activities are to their students, to their children. But again, if this was an issue of individual risk, if I could choose whether or not I took a risk and it didn't affect anybody else, that would be one thing. But that unfortunately is not the situation we're in. All right, done for now.
Susan Fox, did you have anything?
I'm not sure. I missed that, Andrew, because my computer just.
I said, did you have anything?
Yeah, I did, because I am in agreement that taking this move does take us outside of Dane County's guidance and recommendations. I think they've made that pretty clear. I also think our original motion was that we would follow their guidance, and I think the intent was we knew they were going to change recommendations at some point, which they did, and I think the intent of the motion was that we would follow their new guidance, which they came out with on the 14th, which didn't change with regard to sports. So part of what I was wondering was that if procedurally, because we voted to follow their guidance, and now in my mind, we're not with regard to this one thing, if we approve this, if we needed to add the language to the motion outside of, specifically state, a comma outside of PHMDC requirements and regulations, since that's, or if that would be not recommended, because then we're actually stating it outright. Mike, do you have any thought on that? I feel like that's what we're doing, but I just didn't know, if we vote on a specific action procedurally, usually we have to rescind that action. And are we automatically rescinding it by making this motion to that without even saying specifically that it's outside of that guidance? Or?
Well, there is parliamentary wise, Robert's rules does include it's called amend something already adopted. That right. literally is the phrase that's in Robert's rules. Amend something previously adopted. So to the extent that I certainly don't think you want to add that it's a deviation from the guidelines in the motion, right. But I to the extent that you want to acknowledge that this is something that is that in some way replaces what's there or something, I guess that's up to you, but that's getting pretty formal. Okay.
So we don't really need to do that. Okay.
I'd like to go ahead and call the vote.
Well, you got to let people comment, Andrew.
No, we're not going to be here for no 2 hours. Okay. Well, that's not going to happen. Not tonight. Well, we've been in a lot of special meetings. That's a couple that I've missed because I was on vacation. You've seen the emails. You've seen the presentation. We've got we've got Mike that spoke to us. We should go ahead and vote on this.
Well,
Andrew, that is not how it works. The way it works, if you want to bring this to a vote and you want to stop the debate, you can call.
We should not be debating
call the question, right, and 2/3 of us can vote on it. That's the rule. You don't get to make the rules.
We shouldn't even. I'm not making the rules. I'm just telling you that we got all the information. We need to go ahead and we got it out here first and second.
If other members wish to discuss it, they get to discuss it. That's the rule.
Well, you're not going to be discussing all night because it's all about you are over here doing all the speaking.
If that's what we want to do, that's what we do.
So, Elizabeth, did you have anything?
Yeah, I did. And I understand where you're coming from Andrew. And certainly, we're over break having another special meeting, so I can appreciate it. And I want to be able for us to be able to give the space we need to really think through. It's a hard decision because what we're going to do is we're going to open our door, to a risk of our student athletes and our coaches. And so I do think it's worth discussing. So I did want to say, I agree with Peter that we're clearly outside of the original, right, our status quo, to use Mike's language, around using Public Health Madison-Dane County. And I think it's worth our time to think about not just the implications that has for sports, but what are the implications going to be for our reopening plans? Because a lot of our discussions around reopening, we've been hanging our hat on those things. And so nothing to do about that now, but I think that that's like something just to keep in the back of our minds as we move forward. And I also wanted to say that I disagree with you, Peter, around what is our charge. I think as an individual, our charge certainly is to do what we can, to put the pandemic behind us. I don't know that I agree that that's our charge as a school board though, right? Like, is our charge as a school board to be able to the extent that we can, in the circumstances that we're in the environment that we are in, provide quality educational opportunities, whether those be, traditional education or extracurricular, to our students, and be good stewards of, our district resources and supports. And I think that's a different frame than our charge is to make sure that COVID doesn't continue to have community spread. And I guess I'm of the mind, having heard the information today, which is different than I was when we had this meeting last week, to be quite honest with you, that we can both be reasonably safe under the current circumstances and meet the purpose of providing quality educational opportunities for our students by way of sports. And that's a different position that I was in a week ago.
Susan Fox.
I would agree with that, Elizabeth. I think that was very well said. That was kind of what I was thinking. I think for me, because this is a hard decision, because I do believe we should basically be following our local public health agency. And I believe, in fact, they have the statutory authority. But I think that for me, one of the things that makes a big difference is not only how important it is as a total part of the education of our kids, and there are other activities other than athletics as well that are equally important to other students. And I'm more about that later, I guess. But I think the mitigating factor is that we know that huge numbers of our kids right now are putting themselves at greater risk by playing outside the county in circumstances for which we don't have control. And for me, one of the big points in my sort of changing my thinking on this was the fact that it gives us more control. And I think that's an important thing to consider, which is kind of what you just said, Elizabeth. I'm just reiterating the same point, I guess. I think that it gives us more control over our students in setting up these protocols that you guys have put a lot of thought into, coaches and Jeff, with your, for the district as well. And I just feel like it's overall safer than the situation that we have going on now, because if they're playing WIAA sports, they can't play these club sports as well. So it makes them make a choice too. Do I want to continue to play club sports and do whatever I want, or am I going to follow the school rules? And it just seems to be better in that sense.
Susan Manning.
I think both Susan and Elizabeth have stated this extremely well. And what's interesting as I listen is that this was a major factor as we looked at the reopening, and we said, we received some evidence and some expertise that said the students were less safe outside the classroom than in the classroom with our parameters for safety. And that seems to be something I'm also hearing now. And we heard it specifically from Tyler and from the other coaches. And if safety is the paramount thing we want for our students, and if there seems to be the impression from the coaches and administration that this could be a safer environment for them to be in the extracurriculars, then that would seem important to support this issue.
Lorraine.
I want to say that I value the input of our families, our students, and our coaches. And it shows that definitely, I think that we could play outside of Dane County. Also, I think our administration, working with our school attorney, will develop protocols that keeps everyone safe. So I'm in support of it.
Peter.
I'm not saying that, Elizabeth, I'm not disagreeing with you on our charge. I'm saying the best thing we can do for our students is get this pandemic behind us, right? You know, not that that's our number one responsibility. I'm saying that the absolute best thing we can do to the students is be done with this and get everything back to normal. And so my question is, what we're doing consistent with that? That's what we're doing consistent with that.
Yeah, that's a fair distinction, Peter.
Yeah.
Susan Fox.
And I just want to also say that partly in relation.
Of course.
This does not change my thinking on our reopening plan, because that, to me, we still are with this athletic plan with the sports, following the 6-foot distancing to the greatest extent possible, which is different in the classrooms. We're following it even more strictly, and I bet that's greater numbers of students. And I don't have any problem, in other words, approving this and also approving our limited reopening plan, because you're right, we could have people come back and say, well, okay, now you're going to let them play sports, so why can't we have 20 kids in a classroom at a time? No, to me, those are different scenarios, and I don't have a problem making that distinction. So I don't look at this as opening a door toward changing our school reopening plan, just to go on record to say that.
Andrew, if I could speak up one more time. I've been thinking very carefully about what Susan Fox asked about from a parliamentary standpoint here. And the minutes from July 27 reflect the fact that the board will rely upon guidelines and requirements, okay? And I'm not certain, to be honest with you, that the Q&A that came out of the Thursday meeting that went into the notes that Dr. Olson, that you put into your outline, I'm not sure that those things would fall into the category of guidelines or requirements in the first place. I think it certainly would be something along the lines of a rationale for why you wouldn't compete out of Dane County. It might be a little stronger than rationale, but I don't think that it would deviate from the words guidelines and requirements. And so I would urge you to actually take that approach, that it doesn't deviate from that, because it came out of a Q&A on a Thursday with administrators and was not anything that had any formalistic component to it as guidelines or requirements do. I hope that's helpful. I mean, I feel that way.
Peter?
Regardless, I would view this parliamentary as that if we take action tonight on this, then it supersedes the previous action, which would normally, I mean, deliberative bodies often, change their minds over time and have superseding motions, and that would just is simply what we're doing would supersede in part that decision that was made in July from a parliamentary point of view.
Yeah, and I still see it as violating the spirit of the guidelines, even if it's not stated. But I think, given all the new information, not to rehash everything, we don't have to state that. So okay.
Okay, do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Elizabeth?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Lorraine?
Aye.
Peter?
Hey.
Susan Fox?
Aye.
Susan Manning?
Aye.
And myself, Andrew McKinney, aye. The ayes have it. Motion carries. I'd like to have a motion for adjournment.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, and I know we need to finish. One thing we usually talk about is the next board meeting. And I would just like to personally request that we do have a meeting scheduled to have the discussion with the teachers. And then I want the board to at least consider an update on the reopening, I would say the first week of January, rather than waiting until the meeting that's scheduled. I think that's the second week in January. And again, it's up to the board, but I just keep getting so many questions from parents that I think before that meeting date, it would be very, very helpful to them we're scheduled, we're not scheduled to the 13th. If we could meet the 5th or the 6th or the 7th. And I'm saying really just for an hour to get an update. Part of it is we aren't having any community meetings with the parents to kind of keep them updated. So this is a great opportunity for them to listen in and hear where we are, especially since we're going to be implementing, the hybrid on the 25th and possibly the 8th, and going back to sports. So it would be nice to just have Dan come in and do an update. We could, again, schedule it for an hour, 30 minutes for Dan, 30 minutes for questions, and we're done. Otherwise, he gets 7 phone calls, every 2 days. And the community doesn't know the answers.
Just to be clear, are you asking for a meeting to reconsider?
No, I'm asking for a meeting to update us on the number. So for instance, one of the questions I keep getting is if with the implementation now of 3.5, and you said let's say you said you chose for virtual for your 4K2, now you have a chance to also send your 3.5 back. Several of the parents would like to change and send that 4K2 back in person. So again, just being able to ask those questions so the community knows the answers would be really helpful. And knowing and having Dan say, this is what they should do. And this is when they can do it by, and this is how they do it.
Dan, do you have anything?
The board update only goes to us. The community doesn't see it. And it means I have to call them all the time and say, okay, so this person doesn't understand what to do about IEPs during the pandemic.
Well,
I know.
That's done through their teachers and their principals. A lot of those questions are answered. So it's just not clear to me what the point would be exactly.
Just an update on the numbers, the kids, because otherwise we aren't going to have an update on the 3.5 until the board meeting. And if you want to have comments or ask questions, you're pushing Dan back against the wall with only a week or 2 weeks to get a different feeling than what's going forward. It's just a question. If, I'm 1 of 7. If the rest of the board doesn't feel it's important, then we can all call Dan and drive him crazy as usual.
Susan, couldn't that feedback be given through email rather than?
No, because the email it only comes to us. And often the email that goes to the parents, they get the communication, but we don't. So, and it doesn't enable you to ask questions. It doesn't leave the door open for questions. When you get a board update, you don't say, I didn't understand what he meant by this. But again, if the rest of you don't feel you need it and you would prefer a communication to the parents and a board update every week on the reopening.
Well, I'm having a hard time understanding why we wouldn't just discuss that at our January 13th board meeting. I mean, I know it's a week earlier, but I don't know. I guess anyway, that's.
So can they change their mind, Dan? Can people change their mind?
We're not really agendized to go into this, so that is the problem. But I think those questions can be answered by their asking, right?
Well, let me just say, individual parents have been reaching out to principals with regard to any questions that they have. And there is a communication plan that the principals are with the parents. So bottom line is you have a special meeting scheduled already for January 6th, that Wednesday, where you're going to do a listening session with teachers. It will be a notice board meeting. So that's something if you want to consider to add an agenda item for an update, I guess I would say make a recommendation to, President McKinney, and we will set the agenda.
That makes sense.
Okay, that would be perfect. I'm talking 15 minutes, just,
No
if that
time.
would work, that'd be great.
Yeah, just send it. Yeah, just send it to me.
I'll do that. Thanks. And you can say no.
Okay, I'd like to have a motion for adjournment.
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All righty, motion carries. Everybody have a happy new year.
New year.
Safe out there. If you're driving, be safe, please. And we'll see you next year.
That's right.